Hey everybody! So, we're going into more detail about genes now, and we're learning about these three really important concepts here, which are character, phenotype, and genotype. So, we're starting with character. Character basically just means characteristic. Characteristic. So if we're looking at a particular species, like we've got cats here, a particular characteristic or character that we could look at would be fur color. So it's just a feature of that species that can be measured or described. So you can have eye color, you can have height, you can have length of fingers, you can have, does it have a tail or not? So there's basically thousands and thousands of different characters for every species. So we're looking at fur color in this example. The next is phenotype and genotype. So remember that the whole reason we study genetics is to figure out how do these characteristics come about. And generally they're caused by the genes and the DNA. So when we're looking at phenotype, we're looking at what are the possible different ways that the characteristic can be in that species. And phenotype is also called trait. So if we're talking about the fur color character, well, what possible traits can we have for cats if we're talking about fur color? Well, you can see here we can have black fur color, so that's one phenotype or trait. We can have brown, we've got one here. What else? You can have tabby, you can have ginger, you can have grey. So for fur color, there's quite a few different phenotypes or traits that an individual cat could have. So we're just going to look at a black and a brown example here. So phenotypes are what you actually see, the trait that you see. Genotype is the actual genes that cause the phenotype. Genotype. So remember, we've learnt about alleles before, and the genotype is basically listing which two alleles does that individual species have. So that individual in the species have. So which alleles does an individual have? Because remember, we've got 2 copies of every chromosome in our cells, so that means we're going to have 2 alleles for every gene in our body. Except for the sex chromosomes, that comes later. Just for now, we're assuming we've always got 2 copies of every allele. So genotypes always have 2 alleles. And the way we list alleles in a genotype is just using letters. So you can see here, this is showing 2 chromosomes for the fur color that have the fur color trait in them. So remember that every gene is at a particular place in a chromosome. So here's the fur color gene. This might be the cat chromosome number 4, we'll just say. So on chromosome number 4, that's where the fur color gene is. And this particular black cat, it has 2 copies of the capital A allele. So its genotype we're going to write as capital A, capital A. This brown cat here, it's got 2 copies of the fur colour gene as well, but it's got 2 copies of the small a allele. So remember, it's the same gene for fur colour, but it's a different form that makes a slightly different protein, and that ends up leading to a different phenotype. So the next thing we need to learn about are the different ways we can describe a genotype. And there's 4 different words we use, and it's based on, does the individual have the same 2 alleles, or does it have 2 different alleles? So our 2 example cats up here, the black cat here had 2 big A alleles in its genotype, and the brown cat had 2 small a alleles. So they both had the same allele in their genotype. So we call that homozygous. So we say that individual is homozygous, or they have a homozygous genotype. So homo means same, so 2 alleles that are the same. If a cat, though, had a big A allele and a small a allele, it had 1 of each, then we'd call that cat heterozygous. So hetero means different or other, so it's got 2 different alleles for that particular gene. But as always in biology, it gets more confusing because there's 2 ways of actually describing this. The other way that scientists can describe homozygous is to say pure breeding. Pure breeding. And the other way of saying heterozygous is to say hybrid. Basically because it's a hybrid of the 2 different alleles. Okay, so when we're describing genotypes, scientists use lots of different symbols. Often we just use letters, like in our cat fur example. So we generally choose letters that are relevant to that trait that we're looking at. So if we're looking at eye colour, we might use E as our alleles. So an individual here, this one would be homozygous. This individual would be heterozygous for the eye colour gene because they've got a big E allele and a small E allele. So there's lots of different combinations because scientists choose letters based on the gene. So we've got all these individuals are heterozygous. We could have big T, little t. So all these individuals are heterozygous, and these are homozygous, or pure breeding. Okay, so that's how we write genotypes, and that's how genotypes and phenotypes are related to character.